£50. That was the bet I heard a man make against a soldier who would not so much as blink, and I have thought about it nearly every day in the 11 years since. I was selling roasted chestnuts from a barrow at the corner of the forecourt, the way my father had before me, and I had seen 1,000 tourists try to get a rise out of the sentries on the Aldenbrook line. Most of them gave up in a minute. This one did not give up. This one wagered his friends he could make the guard laugh out loud, and he put real money on it, and he kept raising the price of his own ruin while the whole forecourt watched. His name I never learned, and I will not invent one for him, because the man deserves no name in this. I will call him the better, because that is all he was that morning, a man so certain of himself that he would gamble on another man's discipline, as if it were a coin he could flip. He came across the cobbles a little before 11, 3 friends in his wake, and he was already loud. You learn to read loud, working a barrow. There is the loud of a happy crowd, which is good for trade, and there is the loud of a man who has been drinking since breakfast and wants the world to know he is having a wonderful time. This was the second kind. He had a paper cup in his hand that did not hold coffee, and he walked the way men walk when the ground has started to feel uncertain under them, and they are pretending it has not. The guard he chose was a young one. I had watched that sentry take his post that morning, tall, narrow through the shoulders, the red wool of his tunic so new it still held the fold lines from the press, the bearskin riding high and black above a face that could not have been more than 23. He stood at the third box near the gilded railing where the forecourt narrows toward the gate, and he stood the way they are taught to stand, heels together, rifle shouldered, white gloves still, eyes fixed on a point across the square that the rest of us could not see. A statue in red, the tourists always say. They never think the statue can hear them. It can. It hears everything. That is the part no one understands, and it is the part that mattered most that day. "Watch this," the bettor said to his friends, loud enough that I heard it 40 feet away over the hiss of my own brazier. £50. £50 says I make him laugh before the hour's out. One of the friends laughed already, a nervous laugh, the laugh of a man who knows this is a bad idea and has decided not to be the one who says so. Another pulled out his phone and lifted it, because of course he did. The third just shook his head and stepped back, and I marked him as the only one of the 4 with any sense, and I was right, though it would be a long morning before that proved out. "You're on," the phone one said. 50, but he doesn't move for nothing. My cousin tried for 20 minutes. "Your cousin," the bettor said grandly, "is not me." And he turned to the young guard, and he began. It started the way these things always start, with jokes. He planted himself a few feet from the sentry box, swaying just slightly, and he told the guard a joke about a horse walking into a tavern. The guard did not move. He told another about his mother-in-law, an old and tired thing that no one has laughed at since before I was born. The guard did not move. The phone stayed up. A few tourists drifted over, the way they do, smelling a show, and within 5 minutes there was a loose half-circle of maybe 30 people watching a drunk man perform for a soldier who would not perform back. I confess I watched too. I told myself it was for trade. It was not only for trade. What struck me even then was the guard's face. I have a clear memory of it because I kept looking for the crack. We all did. That is the whole sport of it, and the crack never came. It was not a blank face. That is what people get wrong. A blank face is easy. A blank face is a man who has gone somewhere else in his head and stopped listening. This was not that. This young man was listening to every word, I am sure of it, and choosing, word by word, joke by joke, not to give the bettor the thing he wanted. There is a difference between a wall and a man standing where a wall should be, and you can feel the difference if you watch long enough. I was watching long enough. The bettor's jokes ran out faster than his confidence. By the 10-minute mark he had stopped being funny and started being a man losing £50 in public, and that is a different and meaner animal. The grand voice got an edge to it. He stepped closer. "Come on," he said. "Come on, soldier, it's just us. Crack a smile. One smile and I'll leave you be." The guard's eyes stayed on their distant point. A muscle in the young man's jaw was the only living thing in his whole body, and it did not so much as twitch. "He can't even hear you, mate," the phone friend called, grinning, enjoying himself. "He's a statue. Save your money." "He hears me," the better said, and for the first time something cold came into his voice, something that made the nervous friend stop laughing. "Don't you?" "You hear me fine." He leaned in until his face was a hand's width from the brim of the bearskin, and he dropped his voice to where I almost lost it, but the forecourt had gone the kind of quiet that carries. "What's the matter?" he said. "Nobody home. Lights on, nobody home." And still the guard gave him nothing, heels together, rifle shouldered, eyes forward. I want to be honest about what I felt watching, because it is the thing that shames me a little to this day. Part of me wanted the guard to laugh, not because I had money on it, I had none, but because the silence had started to feel cruel, the way a long standoff feels cruel even when you cannot say who the cruelty belongs to. I wanted the tension broken. I wanted the young man to grin and shrug and say something so the better would have his moment and go home and we could all stop holding our breath. That is the trap, you see. That is exactly the trap. The crowd wants the stillness broken, and the man who breaks it loses, and the drunk was counting, without knowing he was counting it, on all of us wanting it broken badly enough to side with him. He raised his voice again back to the grand performer playing to his half-circle now. 40 more minutes, he announced, checking a watch he had to squint at. 40 minutes and the 50's mine. I've got time. I've got all day. He took a swallow from the paper cup. And I'm telling you now, I'm telling all of you, there isn't a man alive I can't get a laugh out of. Not one. This is just a particularly stubborn one. He grinned around at the crowd, soaking up the few chuckles he got, and then he turned back to the guard with the look of a man who has decided that words are not going to be enough. I should have wheeled my barrow away then. I have thought that too, 100 times. I did not. None of us did. We stayed because we wanted to see how it ended, and because not one of us in that crowd understood yet that the bet had already stopped being about a laugh, and had become about whether a young man in red could be made to stop being a soldier. The escalation, when it came, was so gradual that no single step seemed worth stopping. That is how these things go. There is never a moment where a sensible bystander says, plainly, "Now it has gone too far." There are only 100 small moments, each one only a little worse than the last, and by the time you add them up the line is far behind you. He started with faces. He could not get a laugh with words, so he abandoned words and went a clowning. He crossed his eyes. He puffed his cheeks. He did a wobbling impression of a man marching, knees high, arms stiff, a mockery of the very drill the guard had spent his life learning, and the crowd did laugh at that. I will not pretend otherwise, a low ripple of it, and the laugh fed the better like coal feeds a fire. He mistook our laughter for being on his side. We were not on his side. We were laughing the way people laugh at a man slipping on ice at the spectacle, not for the man. But he could not tell the difference, drunk and certain as he was, and so the laughter pushed him on. "There it is," he crowed. "There it is, you nearly went then, I saw it, I saw the corner of your mouth." He had seen nothing. The guard's mouth was a level line and stayed a level line. But the better had begun to believe his own story now, the way a gambler down 50 pounds begins to believe the next throw is the one that turns it round, and belief like that does not stop on its own. It has to be stopped. The friend with the phone was circling for a better angle. The nervous one had stopped laughing altogether and kept glancing toward the gate, where 2 stewards in dark coats stood watching the way stewards do, present, unhurried, marking the scene. The third friend, the sensible one, had drifted to the very edge of the half-circle, close to my barrow, and I heard him mutter mostly to himself, "Come on. You've had your fun. Leave the lad alone." But he did not say it loud enough for the better to hear, and that is its own kind of failure, the quiet kind that most of us are guilty of, and I include myself in that more than anyone. Then the better got the idea that would, in the end, undo him completely. He could not get a laugh from the guard's ears or the guard's eyes. So he reasoned, with the brilliant logic of a man 3 drinks past since, he would get it from the rest of him. "You're not ticklish, are you?" he said, delighted with himself, and a few people groaned, because we all knew at once where this was going and most of us did not want to be there for it. Everybody's ticklish. Even a statue's got a soft spot. He set his paper cup down on the cobbles. I remember that detail with strange clarity, the cup left standing on the stones like a marker, and he flexed his fingers, and he stepped right up into the narrow space in front of the sentry box, close enough that the toes of his shoes were nearly on the painted line. A sentry's post is never to be crossed without leave. A steward took 1 step forward from the gate, just one. A warning step, the kind that says I am watching and I am close, and the better either did not see it or did not care. "Last chance, soldier," he said, and there was nothing playful left in it now, only the hard insistence of a man who has decided he will win. Last chance to crack a smile the easy way. The guard did the only thing he was permitted to do, the thing the situation had not yet escalated to require more than. He spoke. I had not known until that moment that they were allowed to, and most of the crowd gasped a little to hear it, the statue with a voice. It was a young man's voice, but it was flat and trained and carried no fear at all. "Sir," he said, eyes still forward, not looking at the man 6 inches from his face, "step back from the post. Do not touch the sentry." There it was, a line drawn, clear in words, in front of 30 witnesses and a phone camera and 2 stewards. "Step back. Do not touch the sentry." You could not have asked for a plainer fence to be put up, and I have stood in enough courtrooms since, I will get to that, to know exactly how much that single flat sentence would come to matter. The better laughed. Of course he laughed. It was the only laugh anyone got out of that exchange, and it was his, ugly and triumphant. "It talks," he announced to the crowd, throwing his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen, it talks. That's halfway, that's nearly a laugh." I felt the floor move. He turned back to the guard, and his grin had gone wolfish. "Touch the sentry," he repeated, mocking the very words. "Don't touch the sentry. What happens if I touch the sentry, eh? What are you going to do about it? You can't move. You're not allowed to move. That's the whole game, isn't it? You stand there and take it, and I win my 50 quid. And he reached out, slow, theatrical, playing to the camera, and he pressed 2 fingers into the young guard's side, just below the ribs, a deliberate poke, the kind you would give a friend to needle him. Except this was not a friend, and this was not a needle. This was a stranger laying hands on a soldier at his post in front of the gate of the house he was sworn to keep. The guard did not laugh. The guard did not flinch. But something in the air of the whole forecourt changed in that instant, and even the better felt it, because he pulled his hand back half a beat too fast. The way you pull your hand back from a stove you only just realized was hot. For one breath I thought it might end there. I thought the cold thing he had felt would sober him, that he would mutter something and pay his friend the 50 and slope off, the way drunk men so often do when the room turns against them. The crowd had stopped laughing. The phone friend had lowered the camera an inch, uncertain. The sensible friend by my barrow had gone very still. There was a moment, a real one, where the whole thing could have ended with no worse harm done than a young soldier's dignity poked at, and I have wondered ever since how differently that man's life would have run if he had let that moment carry him away from the post. He did not let it. He could not. £50 and his own loud promise that there was not a man alive he could not make laugh, and 4 people who had watched him fail. It was all too much weight on a pride too small to hold it. So instead of stepping back he laughed again, louder, to cover the cold thing, and he said, "Oh, you're tougher than that. 2 fingers, that's nothing. You didn't even feel that." And he drew his hand back and he jabbed it forward again, harder this time, no theater in it now, a real shove of stiff fingers into the soft place under the ribs where a man cannot help but feel it. Once, twice, a 3rd time fast, the way a bully tests whether the boy he has cornered will finally swing. I heard the breath go out of the young guard. A small sound, almost nothing, the grunt of a man absorbing a blow he has decided not to answer. His weight rocked back a half-inch and came forward again and settled. The rifle stayed shouldered. The eyes stayed forward. And in that half-inch of rock and recover, I saw the whole of what these men are, more clearly than I have ever seen it before or since, because a statue does not need discipline. A statue feels nothing. It costs a statue nothing to stand still. It was costing this young man everything in that moment to stand still, and he paid it, and he did not move, and I tell you my eyes stung to watch it. That was the moment the steward stopped being patient. Both of them came off the gate at once, fast and quiet, and a third man I had not marked before came out of the crowd from the other side. Older, in a plain dark suit, not a uniform, but he moved like a man whose whole life had been spent being where trouble was an instant before it knew it was trouble. Later I would learn he was a constable in plain clothes, posted to the forecourt precisely, because crowds and drink and provocation are an old story at a palace gate, and the house had long since learned to keep a quiet hand near the matches. At the time I knew only that 3 men were converging on the better, with a purpose that made the half-circle of tourists shrink back like a tide going out. "Sir," the constable's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "Step away from the sentry, hands where I can see them." The better turned, and for the first time that morning the certainty cracked, not the guard's, his own. He looked at the constable, and he looked at the stewards, and he looked at the half-circle of faces that a minute ago had been his audience and were now, every one of them, witnesses, and you could see the arithmetic begin, slow and clumsy through the drink, as a man who has been winning a game suddenly understands he has been playing a different game altogether and has been losing it badly. "It's a joke," he said. "Mate, it's a laugh, we're having a laugh. There's a bet on. Tell him." He looked absurdly to the phone friend for support, and the phone friend was already backing away. The camera now pointed at the ground, wanting suddenly and very much to be somewhere else. "You laid hands on a sentry of the crown at his post," the constable said, "twice. The second time hard enough that 30 people saw it and one of them filmed it. That's not a bet, sir, that's an assault. Turn around." "It's a poke," the better said, and his voice had gone up, gone thin, the bluster leaking out of it fast. "It's a you can't be serious. A poke. He's a grown man in a fur hat, he didn't even." "The sentry told you to step back and not to touch him," the constable said, "in front of all these people. You heard him. You touched him anyway. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." And I watched the better's eyes go, last of all and far too late, to the young guard himself, to the soldier he had spent the better part of an hour trying to break, looking now for some mercy there, some sign that the lad would wave it off, call it nothing, let him go. He found nothing. The guard stood his post, heels together, rifle shouldered. Eyes forward, fixed on that point across the square the rest of us could not see, the same point he had held through every joke and every jab, as if the man being cuffed 3 feet away were no part of his concern at all, because, in the way that mattered, he was not. The guard had a post. The post was the point. The man had only ever been whether passing across it. The cuffs came out. I had never been close enough to a real arrest to hear the sound they make, that small hard ratchet twice, and it is a sound I have not forgotten, because of how completely it ended the thing. One moment a man is the loudest voice in a forecourt, betting 50 pounds on his own cleverness. The next his wrists are behind his back and a steward is reciting words at him about his rights in 100 phones. For the crowd had swollen to 100 at least by now, are all of them up and recording, and the grand performer of an hour ago is just a frightened man with the drink curdling in him, saying it was a joke. It was only a joke, to people who are no longer listening. They walked him out through the side of the forecourt toward a gate I had never seen opened, the constable on one arm and a steward at his shoulder, and the crowd parted for them, and then closed behind them and turned, as one body, back toward the sentry box, as if to check that the young guard was still there, that the thing we had all watched had really happened, and the still center of it had truly held. He was still there. Of course he was still there. He had a post. I want to dwell on that, because it is the heart of what I carried away from that morning, and it took me a long time to put words to it. The bettor had built his whole bet on a misunderstanding so complete that it had become a kind of blindness. He believed the guard could not move. He kept saying it, you can't move, you're not allowed to move, that's the whole game. And he was wrong in the way that matters most. The guard could move. The guard could have turned and seized him by the collar at the first joke. A trained man, a young strong man, could have put that drunk on the cobbles in a heartbeat and not one of us would have blamed him. The guard chose not to. Every second of that hour, jab by jab, he chose not to. The stillness was not a cage. The stillness was a decision, renewed and renewed and renewed. And the renewing of it was the hardest work I have ever watched a man do. And the bettor never once understood that the man he was poking was stronger than him in the only way that finally counted, strong enough not to give him what he wanted. That is the thing the crowd wants broken, you see, and that is the thing the crowd is wrong to want. We had all of us in our hearts wanted the laugh. We had wanted the tension to snap. And if the guard had given it to us, if he had cracked a grin, or barked at the man, or shoved him off, the bettor would have won his 50 pounds and walked away the hero of his own story, the man who beat the unbeatable soldier. And the lesson the whole forecourt would have carried home is that if you push a disciplined man hard enough and long enough and meanly enough, eventually he becomes you. The guard refused to teach that lesson. He stood there and let the man hang himself with his own hands, and he never lifted a finger to help him do it, and he never lifted a finger to stop the law from doing what the law does, and that, I see it clearly now, is what discipline is actually for. Not for show. Not for the tourists' photographs. For exactly that morning, exactly that man, exactly that line that must not be crossed and the cost of holding it. I closed up my barrow not long after. There is no selling chestnuts to a crowd that has just watched a man arrested. The appetite goes out of people, and besides, my hands were not steady enough to work the brazier. But before I went I saw the young guard's relief come at the changing of the watch, and I saw him march off the line, and I saw, for just a moment as he passed within a few feet of my barrow, what the hour had cost him. His face was still set, still trained, still giving nothing to the cameras that swung to follow him. But his eyes, close up, were the eyes of a man who had been somewhere hard and had only just come back, and there was a fine tremor in the white-gloved hand at his side that he would not have let anyone see if he had known it showed. He had won. He did not look like a man who had won. He looked like a man who had carried something heavy a long way and set it down at last, and was only now feeling the weight of it in his arms. I thought that was the end of it, the way you think a story is over when the loud part stops. It was not the end of it. It was barely the middle. A clip went out that afternoon, the phone friend's clip, the very one he had filmed to capture his mate's triumph, now capturing the opposite. He took it down within the hour, but an hour is several lifetimes on the modern street, and by evening it was everywhere, and it was not the laughing matter the bettor had imagined it would be. People do not, it turns out, side with the drunk who jabs a young soldier in the ribs. They side with the soldier. They watched the still red figure absorb jab after jab and not break, and they did the arithmetic the bettor had been too far gone to do, and the verdict of the street came back long before any verdict of the court. The man had been a fool and a bully, and had got exactly what fools and bullies get. I learned the rest in pieces over the weeks that followed, some of it because a constable came to take my statement. I had been the nearest steady witness with no dog in the fight, neither friend nor tourist, just a chestnut man at his barrow, and some of it because, when the matter came to a hearing, I was asked to stand up in a paneled room and say what I had seen. I had never spoken in a court before. My voice shook at the start and steadied as I went, the way the young guard's voice had steadied, and I found I was glad to be there, glad to be the one to say plainly what the cameras could only show in part, that the sentry had warned the man, clearly in words, to step back and not to touch him, that the man had touched him anyway twice, the second time hard, and that the soldier had done nothing in return but stand his post and bear it. It was the warning that mattered most in the end. The magistrate said as much. A man may blunder into a great deal of trouble drunk and be shown some mercy for it, but this man had been told plainly, by the very person he then assaulted, in front of 30 witnesses and a camera, exactly where the line was, and had stepped across it on purpose to win a bet. There is no mercy for that, or there should not be, and there was not. The charge was assault. The drink was no defense. The law took a dim view of a man who chose to get to that state and then chose, on top of it, to lay hands on a soldier who could not under his own orders strike back. The plea of it was only a poke, found no friends in that room either. A poke given to a man forbidden to defend himself, the magistrate observed dryly, is not made gentler by the fact that he was forbidden to defend himself. Rather the reverse. I will tell you something about that hearing that has stayed with me longer than the verdict, because it shows you the rot at the root of the whole bet. When the bettor's own friends were called, the phone one, the nervous one, the sensible one, not a single one of them stood up and said the thing he had been counting on them to say. He had imagined, I am certain, that when the trouble came his friends would close ranks around him and swear it was harmless fun, a lark, a misunderstanding, and the law would shrug and let it go. That is the unspoken contract the loud man believes he has with the men who laugh at his jokes. He believes their laughter is loyalty. It is not. It never was. The phone friend, asked to account for the clip he had filmed and then so hastily deleted, said only that he had told the bettor to leave the soldier alone and that the bettor had not listened. It was not quite true. I had heard him egging the man on. Save your money, mate. He's a statue. But it was the version that kept the phone friend's own hands clean, and a frightened man reaches for clean hands first. The nervous one, white as the guard's gloves on the stand, said he had wanted to go home for the last 20 minutes of it and had not known how to say so. And the sensible one, the fourth, the one who had drifted to the edge of my barrow and muttered leave the lad alone too quietly for anyone but me to hear. That one stood up and said, in a clear, steady voice, that he had told his friend plainly it had gone too far and that his friend had ignored him, and that what he had watched the soldier endure was the most disciplined thing he had ever seen a man do, and that he was ashamed to have been standing in the same group of 4. I watched the bettor's face while his oldest friend said that, and I will not forget it. It is one thing to lose 50 pounds. It is another to learn, in a paneled room, in front of strangers, that the men you thought were your audience had been your witnesses all along, and that the truest of them had been quietly ashamed of you for an hour, and you had been too busy performing to notice. That is the loneliness the loud man never sees coming. He thinks the crowd is with him because it is looking at him. He never grasps that being looked at and being supported are two entirely different things, and that a man at the center of every eye in a forecourt can be, at that very moment, the most alone person in it. The guard, who no one's eye stayed on for long because there was nothing to see but stillness, was not alone at all. He had his post and his orders, and behind him a whole house and a whole tradition and a body of law that would, when the moment required it, move on his behalf with cuffs and a courtroom while he himself never had to lift a hand. The bettor had only his own voice, getting louder to hide that it was getting smaller, and 4 men who turned out not to be what he had wagered they were. But the conviction, when it came, was the smallest part of what that hour cost the man. This is the part I think the bettor never saw coming, even at the end, because men like him never do. They imagine the worst that can happen is the loud, obvious thing, the cuffs, the fine, the mourning in court, and they never count the quiet wreckage that runs out from a public folly like cracks from a stone thrown through glass. He lost the bet to begin with, 50 pounds. He never made the guard laugh. He made him grunt once under a hard jab, and that is the only sound he ever got, and it was not the sound he wanted, and the 50 went to the phone friend, who I am told did not want to take it and took it anyway. £50. The cheapest thing he lost that day. He lost his good name, which had been worth a great deal more than £50, and which he had spent his whole life building without ever stopping to reckon its value. The clip outlived the taking down of it. His face was in it, clear and laughing, jabbing at a boy in a red coat, and it followed him. I cannot swear to it, but I heard from a man who knew a man that it cost him his position, that the firm he worked for, a respectable one that put its name to its word, did not care to have that face laughing in that clip attached to its letterhead, and let him go quietly, the way firms do. I heard his engagement broke, though I will not dwell on a thing I cannot confirm, and that is no one's business but the two souls in it. I heard a good deal, and most of it I have let go, because it does not do to feast on a man's ruin even when he built it himself with both hands. What I am sure of is the shape of it, that a man who walked into the forecourt that morning loud and certain and well said in the world walked out of the court, some weeks later quiet and diminished, and turned out of nearly everything that had held him up, and that the distance between those two men was the exact distance from the painted line in front of a sentry box to a hand's breadth across it. Inches. He lost a life over inches. And the thing he had wagered against, the discipline of a man he had never met and had decided on sight, was a hollow costume with no one inside it. That discipline was the only thing in the whole story that came through it whole. I went back to the forecourt many times after that, of course. It is my corner, my father's corner before me. I watched for the young guard, but I never saw him again, or if I did not know him, for the bearskin and the discipline make them all into the same flawless figure on purpose, which is rather the point of it. New sentries took the third box and stood it the way he had stood it, and tourists tried the old games on them, and most gave up in a minute. Now and then one would not give up, and I would feel the old tightness in my chest, and I would watch, and the guard would hold, and the fool would either come to his senses or be helped to them, and the line would hold, and I would go back to my chestnuts knowing something I had not known before that morning 11 years ago. I had thought before it that the still soldier at the gate was the easiest job in the world, that a man had only to stand there and look fine in the photographs. I know better now. I know that the standing is the whole of it, and that the standing is harder than any rushing in, and that the man who can be poked and jeered at and bet against for an hour and not give the mob the break it is howling for is not a statue, and not a costume, and not a man with nobody home behind the eyes. He is the most awake man in the square. He is the only one of us who understood that morning that the bet was never about a laugh. It was about whether he would stop being what he had sworn to be, for the price of £50 and a stranger's amusement. He would not, he did not. And the man who bet that he could make him left the forecourt in cuffs, having lost the wager and a great deal more besides, while the soldier he had wagered against stood exactly where he had stood the whole time, heels together, rifle shouldered, eyes forward, having lost nothing at all, having only proven, to anyone with the sense to read it, the plain and unshowy truth that the strongest thing a man can do is sometimes simply to refuse to be moved.